Hello and welcome to this Construction News webinar. My name is Lem Bingley and I'm the editor of Construction News. Today's webinar is part of CN's Inspiring Women in Construction programme, which has been running for the past 3 years. It aims to promote diversity and to help women make career progress in our industry. Now, today we're focusing on the role of men in gender equality, which might sound a little bit odd, but is actually a very important consideration. Government data suggests that something like 7 out of every 8 people you might meet in the construction sector are going to be men, and with an even greater proportion of men in certain parts of the industry. It's a simple fact that the actions and attitudes of men are going to have a great impact on how women fare in their careers in this industry. So it has to be worth talking frankly about what men can do to help. Now, before we dive into that topic, I just want to briefly thank our sponsors who have generously supported this year's series of webinars. Our headline sponsor is Wilmot Dixon, and I'd also like to thank our other sponsors, Juice, the NASC, Trad, and Vanchi Construction. Now, obviously, we're all still in the midst of what seems to be, unfortunately, an escalating virus crisis once again, and this webinar brings together people in various different locations. So please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties as we go along today. If any of us disappear suddenly from your screen, we'll try to get back online as quickly as possible. We are scheduled to run for 45 minutes today. We'll be taking questions towards the end of the session. If a question does occur to you, please type it in right away. There's a Q&A option which should appear in the toolbar on your screen. And you can see and vote on the questions posed by other people. So hopefully we can make sure that we answer the questions which are of most use and most interest to the audience today. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our 3 panelists today who've kindly agreed to share their insights on today's topic. They are Amy Baker from consultancy JLL, Lorraine Martins from Network Rail, and John Bowden from Wilmot Dixon. I apologise. I asked John how I should pronounce his surname, and it's John Boughton from Wilmot Dixon. I have the attention span of a gnat, clearly. Now, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and to say a few words about today's topic. And I'm going to ask Amy to start that process. So over to you, Amy. And I'm afraid you're muted at the moment, so you may need to switch your microphone back on.
We are failed at the first hurdle. So yeah, thank you, Lem. As Lem mentioned, I head up the project and cost management team for JLL in the UK. I've been with JLL now for nearly 10 years. Joined them in Hong Kong, moved with them throughout Australia, and actually only came back to the UK just 2 years ago. Always managing teams of construction professionals. And really my career started at Network Rail. And I studied engineering at university. So gender balance for me has always been a facet of my working and my studying career. It's not something that I've necessarily seen as something that's limited me, but I completely appreciate that I've been very fortunate in my career, and I suppose why I've got something to share and why I'm passionate is because I've really been on the receiving end of a number of really specific career enhancing interventions, and all of those interventions were spearheaded and funded by sort of teams of senior men in the industry. So I can see that there is a very specific role that they have to play. And I suppose, you know, giving that opportunity to say, that's the role that you can play, rather than having to join in on the female voice. There are specific things that they can that can be done. So there is a certain element of vulnerability, and I completely appreciate that for men. But for me, the sort of traditional views of this is positive discrimination or what about me, that just is not sustainable anymore. This is about men. And really, it's about gender balance. So another area that I'm really really passionate about is men's mental health. And my vision is that through gender balance, we address a multitude of issues that relate to societal norms of the roles that both men and women play in our industry. So I think there's benefits for both sides. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a really interesting discussion.
Thanks very much, Amy. Lorraine, again, if you could introduce yourself and take over from here.
Thank you, Len. Thanks for inviting me to join this event. And Amy, that was a really great introduction, because I think it segues into some of the things that I wanted to say. So I'm Lorraine Martins. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the Director of Diversity Inclusion at Network Rail. Network Rail has something like 42,000 employees, and we work with about 120,000 contractors. I've been at Network Rail for 8 years this month. It's the longest I've been anywhere. And I guess I've worked in construction since well, my introduction to construction, or the hard side of construction, as opposed to the regeneration side of construction, was when I worked on the construction of the Olympic Park with the Olympic Delivery Authority. So I guess in terms of Network Rail's 42,000 employees, 81% are men and 91% are from a white background. And overall, 87% have shared their diversity and inclusion data with us. And so we have, of that 87%, 5% have said that they're LGBT+, 3% have said that they're disabled. So you'll see from that the kind of picture of Network Rail mirrors very closely the picture of engineering and construction as a sector. And we have an aging population. And we also face a skill shortage. So I think it's imperative for us in our sector to begin to reframe our image, to become much more attractive to a set of people who may not have considered construction or railway or engineering as a place for them. And I think that that's our challenge. In terms of my personal reflections, I think the title of our conversation is quite provocative. So Man Up speaks to me of the kind of traditional stoic behaviours that we see men exhibit when they're kind of in our industry. So not necessarily owning some of the challenges. And I think, Amy, you're absolutely right in raising the issues around mental health around men, and we know that the disproportionate rates of suicide and highest amongst younger men. So these, the language itself is really something that we need to think about, and we need to challenge ourselves. The other issue is gender, and Amy has said this, gender is about us. So we are all, we all have a gender, we all have a sex, we all have an age, we are all protected by the legislation in terms of the Equality Act. So there's almost a forced distinction to think that when you're talking about gender equality, you're talking about somebody else, you're talking about yourselves, we're talking about us and how we relate to each other and how we enable each other to be the best. And I think once we begin to be a bit more comfortable with that understanding that diversity and inclusion is about everyone, then I think it shifts the discussion to more of what's getting in the way of being genuinely meritocratic, what's inhibiting us from allowing talent to genuinely go to the fore. And a lot of that is because we recruit in our own image. A lot of that is because we have some stereotypes about some of the roles in construction that only men can do, or only white people can do, or women can only do HR roles. And I think that lies at some of the challenges that we need to challenge ourselves on. We've all had interactions with women in our lives. So whether that's good or bad, we have those experiences. We've had less probably experiences of diverse communities. So people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, we probably had less interaction. But Amy entreated us, and I would echo that, to kind of lean into the discussion. We are going to make mistakes, but I think one of the key things that I'm really clear for us is that we have a responsibility as a sector to be much more inclusive. If we want to fulfill the big ambitions that we have as a country and a wider global society, then we need to think about how we're enabling different people to contribute to the successes that we want to see in our country, and to think about how we enable others who traditionally may be excluded to be part of that success. And I'll draw a pause there and hand back to you, Lem.
Well, thank you, Lorraine. Already lots of food for thought there just in your intro. So we shall move on now to John, if you'd like to say a few words of introduction.
Yeah, of course, Len. Well, John Boughton, I'm the Deputy Managing Director for Wilmot Dixon and their Wales and West region. For those of you who don't know, we are a construction partner. So I guess the question is why am I here? Where's my interest? So I'll avoid giving too much of my own personal perspective right now, because I'm sure a lot of that will come out within the discussion. However, why personally do I take an interest? Well, partly because I genuinely care, but more so I feel that, and this came from a personal experience, call it a light bulb moment if you wish. 2 years ago, I attended a similar event, albeit it wasn't online. And you know, we've all got our personal ambitions. I would like to be the best leader I can be. And what dawned on me at an Inspire Me event was that actually I was uneducated about quite a few things, partly about who I am, and the majority of that was around my unconscious bias, which I've got to accept that I have. I had a lot more 2 years ago, but in a business that's committing to or targeting to have gender parity by 2030 in all disciplines, I felt I had to educate myself with a bit of support to become a better leader. And from a business point of view, we are clear that the balanced teams, teams with different perspectives, produce better results. So as well as having that personal interest, the business case for having well balanced and complementary teams speaks for itself, and we have evidence of, through the progress we've made already, that those statements are correct. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here, Len.
Well, thanks very much, John. If we move on to the first of the questions that we want to talk about today. Now, I said in the introduction, we've all touched on the fact that the majority of people working in this industry are men. The industry also has a perhaps unfortunate reputation for being particularly sexist. We've all heard of the stereotype of catcalls from scaffolders as women walk by. I'm interested to know, Amy, perhaps you can start off in response. Do you think that reputation for ingrained sexism is deserved? Do you think it's getting better or worse as time goes by? And what do you think are the most effective ways that companies can start to tackle that corrosive culture if they see it in their company?
Yeah, thank you, Lem. I mean, I think it's fair to say that I can only really comment on the experiences that I've had and some of the you know, some of the spheres that I've been part of. I definitely have been on the receiving end of sexist attitudes. So, and having only really been in the industry for 15 years, do I think it's changed? There's probably more awareness about it, I think, and a definite, I think from a senior leadership perspective, an ambition to change it. I think it's now about how we equip both men and women to tackle it, and it can be. I think what we've typically done is we've asked women to speak up and to have the voice to change, and I think that it's almost like we have a Race for Change network at JLL, and we did a recent survey. It's a similar sort of thing where we are hearing now that there is a certain tiredness in asking women to be the only ones that should be solving it. because we have to tackle all sorts of other things, sort of daily discrimination and all sorts of things, that if it just solely rests on our shoulders, that almost sets us back further. So I think it's about equipping both sides and providing those mechanisms that really, it's about a cultural change, I think, and being able to have a voice that calls out behaviour that's unacceptable, but for that to be backed up from a senior level. So equipping senior leaders with the ability to identify when these things are happening, and systemic and specific instances of it, and actually not allowing it anymore. So but it's not up, I think it's historically always been up to those groups of individuals that have been on the receiving end to speak up. And I think it's about, again, the advocacy word, and also, you know, having those channels of open communication and open feedback that we can really tackle it. So I would like to think that it has improved, but I couldn't specifically give you evidence that it has. So I think there's a long way to go.
Thank you, Amy. Lorraine, what's your view? Are we heading in the right direction as an industry? Are matters improving? And also, again, if you've got thoughts about what the most effective things for companies to do to sort of start that conversation or to start things moving in the right direction, what would they be?
So I guess in a sense, I think the challenge is when we issue these epithets, you know, we talk about sexism and racism, it's actually what do you do with it? So it's the levels of ownership that I'm really interested in. And so do people recognize when their behaviors are discriminatory? Do they recognize the microaggressions or the micro incivilities that they meet onto others? And that's the shift that I think we need societally. When, you know, construction is no different to any other sector, and so the issue of sexism is not one that, you know, we own alone, and it's about education. It's about educating people to be respectful. It's about understanding, as John was talking about, where your biases lie and what's behind that and how they kick in. But more importantly, it's a preparedness by individuals to be different, as in behave differently and to behave more respectfully, and be attentive to the fact that people might say, well, actually, when you describe me like this, I don't like it, and be able to move on. And that's a mature way, I think, of addressing behaviours which are inappropriate. So some of it comes from us as industries doing sessions. I think, for me, unconscious bias is really important in a context. It's in the context of having inclusive leadership behaviours. So in and of itself, knowing where your bias is doesn't really make a difference. But if you're tasked with understanding that your behaviours can change and that you have some license and agency over them, then I think that that's a really important thing. So at Network Rail, we've rolled out our inclusive leadership programme, and we've embedded unconscious bias elements in our recruitment training and in some elements of our leadership training. So it has to be, for me, an iterative process that integrates those behaviours as the behaviours that we want to see throughout our organisation, that are commensurate with the values that we have as businesses and commensurate with helping us to deliver the high performance and high quality work that we say we want to do. So just focusing on the sexism and individual sexism alone, I think, is not going to yield a change. But where I think we are in a better place is because movements like the Me Too movement, like Black Lives Matter, have given us a wider set of language to have those discussions around, well, so how do we want to be and how do we want to make sure discrimination is eliminated from our experience?
Well, thank you, Lorraine. John, some of the issues that Lorraine's been talking about there, I know you perhaps had first-hand experience of going through unconscious bias training, and you talked about having this awakening at one of our previous events about your own attitudes as well, or perhaps lack of awareness of this issue. What's your perspective on the trajectory? Do you think things are improving, and do you think that the measures that you've gone through have been very helpful?
Yes. So on the question about do I think things are improving, I actually think they are. So my response is based on my lens. So if I went to different places, I may see different things. Certainly in our business, we are seeing the balance change. Let's say the metrics, percentages change in terms of